Your goal is to train up a high school graduate to fly the F-35 in 6 months or less. Right now, it's a 2.5-year process so that they're like minimally capable. Flash forward, well, what are we trying to do in Ukraine right now? We're handing F-16s to people who have never flown an American aircraft before.
Welcome to the Startup Defense. My name is Callye Keen. Today I have Eric Frahm from Gallium Solutions. Eric has been fundamental in this shift that we are always talking about every week about how there was nothing and there was these innovation programs and they've evolved and now there is a pathway towards funding and innovation and all these fun things that we work in every day. It is complex, but Eric spent time at AFWERX, had a pivotal role there, and now he is helping people connect with those types of funding. And I lovingly and jokingly say, like, you're the concierge to these types of opportunities. But Eric, this is how I like to kick off the show. What are you passionate about right now?
What I am most passionate about right now is the energy that I would say all the services are bringing, obviously to varying degrees, right? But all the services now are coming around to the notion of dual use technologies being critical to the future of national security and a viable pathway for them to meet their needs. I'm seeing that. Certainly the Air Force, I think, was on the leading edge of that, and I'm proud to play a role in that. The Army picked up our playbook and frankly improved on it in some important ways. And we're finally starting to see the Navy and the Marine Corps come along with not just some, small unit-based innovation efforts, but starting to actually put some contract vehicles in place. That's what makes me excited on the government side. I would say on the commercial side, the other thing that makes me very excited is that commercial entities are starting to see this as a real opportunity. You got Andreessen Horowitz, raising a pretty huge fund to invest in, dual use and defense focused startups. We're starting to see some companies achieve some very significant valuations despite a very heavy defense focus. This system is starting to work. So we've now at this point watched about a half a decade of talk about defense innovation. It's starting to happen. That's what makes me very excited because I start thinking, boy, if this was only in 5 years, what does the future look like in 2030, 2035, 2040? I think we're on the right track, and that's great.
Yeah, the joke I always make on the show is I've been doing this my whole life and suddenly now I'm cool. I don't really think that that's playing out the way that people might think. Yeah, the net of this is that in the past, very hidden market, then there's these programs bubbling up and now people are talking about this and it is a really great time to be involved in the space as it moves very quickly. I think that's exciting. I just like making cool stuff. And I like working with people that are also interested in seeing that stuff have an impact and get to market and do something interesting in the world. And we met because of the programs that I'm doing with Department of Energy. A client on that side, we were connecting with their Solar Prize Challenge and some of the other programs that are on the non-DoD side of the innovation programs that are out there, because there really is one of every flavor and type at this point. And they have another product which was a better fit for AFWERX, SoftWorks, those types of programs. And so you and I got connected through that, and we've been talking about Gallium Solutions. And it's just a very different time than now. But from me as like somebody running an accelerator or acting as I call reverse commercialization, right? Talking to people that are out there doing the thing and then trying to figure out who has IP that's around this. There's a huge gap between knowing a smart person that can do it and knowing a person that really needs it. There's this big jump. I work in hard tech. You do a lot in that hard tech space. And that gap is quite a bit of money, I guess. I think the returns, though, are starting to be seen. So you see people like Andreessen realizing gains in the market, and you see big funded startups. We pick on Anduril and Shield and those kind of top 50, top 100 investments. But in the past, it was just InQtel and maybe some SBIR activity. But how has that really pushed you to create Gallium? And like, how has that really changed from what you saw at the beginning of AFWERX?
At Gallium, we have the luxury of, I think, only probably tangentially being worried about the VC world in general. It's certainly something that we're close to, and we speak a lot with venture capital. But, that's all. What we do is really focus on adjusting to where the company is in terms of its maturity. And so if they're at a very early stage where it's all about R&D, generally speaking in the hard tech space, venture capital really isn't interested. It's too risky. And so there are typically, one of or several questions that need to be answered in that R&D space at the technical level to show viability, to be able to then evaluate product market fit more fully. And that starts looking like, something like a prototyping contract, where we've not only just theorized that this could be helpful to somebody, but now we've built something, deployed it, tested it, gathered some specific feedback. And now we have something that is starting to look like product market fit. That's more the time and space where venture is more invested in it or more interested in it. That's not to say you're not going to get angel investment in that R&D phase, but you're not going to be out there raising a large seed round, or certainly not a Series A, absent those things. I think the other thing we've seen here in the last 2 years on the venture space is that early on, I think there was probably a little bit of over exuberance on the venture side, and some folks were starting to engage and actually invest on the notion of, well, this company just won $1 million from DoD, without really fully realizing the implications of $1 million and how $1 million for you and I, for most startups, is a huge contract. And for DoD, it's we found this between the seat cushions, or even less, just because it's silver money. We in the Air Force, prior to the point to me, it's not me anymore, but when we were getting the open topic done, I may have this number right or wrong, but I believe it was something like $220 million of the silver money allocated to the Air Force every year was just going unspent. And so that was where the open topic got its budget, literally unspent. What fund in America, what venture capital fund in America has $220 million of unallocated money year after year after year? It doesn't exist. But for the Air Force, there's really very little commitment behind that stuff. Well, now we're starting to see in some important ways those phase twos start maturing, start getting integrated into programs, start spinning out and getting picked up by primes and being placed into programs, or embedded into programs, I guess I should say. And now it's becoming more investable. I think the venture space is starting to mature and say, okay, a prototype is a prototype. That's non-recurring engineering. That's great. Keep us posted. We'll be in touch, which is the right answer. And so we're starting to see, I guess the bottom line is, we're starting to see these processes inside of the government mature to start more fully, I'm not saying it's perfect, but more fully integrate these programs in. We're starting to see venture starting to understand the nuances and details of what it takes to win government business. And I guess one final point that I would make is, and this came out of a conference the Capital Factory put together out in Austin a couple months ago called Fed Supernova. Just from walking around at this point, 3-4 years, you hear the conversations going on around you, and it's suddenly like something happened in the last 12 months where it went from, how do I spell SBIR, to suddenly I'm literally hearing people talk about, well, I'm engaging this person and I'm talking to this PEO and I'm going to get in the PALM process here and I need it inserted this way. They're using the right language. They're talking to the right people. They know how to navigate the system. We're starting to see companies that are much more mature who are recognizing they're getting out of this mode that I call the I know a guy syndrome. You don't get anywhere in the government by just knowing somebody. Does it help? Of course. Is it necessary? Maybe. But at the end of the day, the government spends money through process. And there are too many people in that process for one relationship. I don't care who it's with. I don't care how deep it goes. There's too many people in that process for any one person to be completely determinative of whether or not you're going to get to money. And by the way, we want it that way. That's good. We do not want to live in a society where I, as a government program manager with a, $50 million, $100 million, $1 billion budget, can just capriciously decide to fund things. That's not the way we want our society to run. It's going to lead to a lot of really bad things, right? Anyway, I don't want to talk too long about that, but happy to take that in any direction you want. But that's kind of what I see right now is everybody is getting better. The government's getting better, VC is getting better, and the companies, I would say most importantly, are getting better.
That's a fair lay of the land right now. I think people are pulling out their jargon dictionary and learning a little bit more about the process and the words and helping navigate. Or I'm seeing more teams grab somebody with acquisition experience or have a consultant or work with a group that allows them to figure out, okay, these are the pieces that I need to have in place. On the VC side, we're seeing a lot more of that hey, I want one of my associates or I want deal flow from XYZ where they understand like, where should I in this SBIR phase 1, phase 2, what is a phase 3? Is that a real thing? Or like, where should I insert myself? And yeah, going from, you realize that in hard tech, $1 million for a prototype, I don't care what vehicle it is, it's going to have some strings attached to it. And it may not really go to where exactly you think it is. And then also $1 million might just get you like a concept prototype for a system, right? You're not going to build an exquisite system for $1 million, right? You're going to write a paper, and it's not investable yet. And I look at, let's just pick on AFWERX SBIR phase 1. What's that? $180,000. You get that. That's great. It's market validation for me if I'm looking for deals. It's market validation if I'm looking for potential partners to do something interesting with. It's traction. It's all those good things. But like, is it investable at that point? I would wait until they're executing on that SBIR or they're fulfilling that promise. There's a lot of investors that are using those programs now as deal flow, which I think is ultra smart. It's public record, right? You can pull who has what contract. You go and select some of the smartest, most cutting edge things that you want, and you just search for it right on grants.gov and go have a conversation, and people will be very happy for it. But unless they have a champion, to me, it's kind of not investable. It does, in my opinion, unless they have a pathway to a pilot, or they know that they can get some RD&E money to build a real, there's like all these additional questions that I have, but it is interesting to see, like, we've had Shield Capital on, we've had Decode on, we've had, of course, people around AAL, and that means Capital Factory, on the show. And so there's all these people coming out of these programs or coming out of, my side of the industry, out of the innovation portion of the industry, and then working in capital, which, like, we already understand this because it's like my job to understand, like, if I'm going to make 1,000 of something, when is that going to happen? What are the hoops that are going to jump through? What do I need? And so I can't just listen to an entrepreneur and say, hey, I just got an SBIR. That means that we're trucking now, we're cooking. I'm like,
it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing to have even a phase 1. Not everybody wins them.
It's the best way to get a phase 2, right? Is to win phase 1.
I mean, you got to start. You have to start where you are. Put too much weight on the notion that now I have this sole source capability. And I think that's where people got really caught up in. And I think that, partly because that was what we were saying when, we were the Air Force pushing all this stuff out. I think we frankly, we oversold it and people listened to us, and that's not good. But that message has, I think, been clarified a little bit. I think the next stage of clarification that I think folks need to understand is phase 3 is not the goal. Phase 3 is best thought of just like anything else that comes immediately after a prototype. Scale up. There is a gulf of difference between doing a prototype and full production. Now, they call it production, but in any sort of a large government program, you would first enter out of prototyping, you would enter into what's called low rate initial production, LRIP. That's a better way of thinking of phase 3. We're still proving this out. There's still more work to be done. It's less about R&D. It's more about operational integration. But that's not to say that it's zero R&D. And now we're proving out more manufacturability, particularly in the case of hard tech. But even in software, look, bugs happen at scale that don't happen in prototyping. I don't care how good your code is. I don't care how good your cloud architectures are. You start pumping more users through the system, you're going to start seeing it break in new and interesting ways. You got to go fix it. You have to prove the efficacy at a larger scale at some intermediate step. There's still a ton of stakeholder development needs to happen. And if you have a really interesting technology, and maybe even a marginally interesting technology, there are so many other people inside the government that should be using it or could be using it, that there really needs to be a second, third, fourth, fifth line of effort running to really take advantage of this opportunity that you've built just by getting into a phase 3. So phase 3 is not the goal. I would say even a program of record may not even be the goal. That is a milestone. It's a worthy achievement. It makes you successively more investable. This is really about how do we get more and more and more people inside the government using this thing, making their mission better, making themselves more effective, and aligning all of the stakeholders that need to happen or need to be aligned to get that budget in place, to put that contract in place, to execute on the contract, to manage the program. There's a lot of machinations that have to happen. And it's not just these perfunctory sign-offs. What we really help our clients to understand is, what is that process? How do we navigate it? And what I tell folks all the time is, unless you respect that process for what it is and the value it provides, you're not going to be successful, because you're going to come across somebody who does understand the value it provides, and they're going to spot you from a mile away, and they're just going to put the stop sign out. And so unless you're ready to engage in that continual convincing process, this won't work. And that gets you into these other sets of advice that I think is out there in the world of, look, just go get a phase 2, collect the money, do what you need to get it, move on, go back to the commercial market. That advice is out there. I won't take a position on what the morality of it. It's business. It's all fair. But I think that it's ignoring a very real opportunity that's out there if you're willing to put in the work and engage.
Yeah, unless you make your company into into a cyber factory, there's not enough money on a phase 2 to really move the needle for a startup. Yeah. It's definitely out there, right? So there's controls that are in place that people have suggested to limit that behavior. But from the startup perspective, it's not going to move the needle for you. So it's just a piece in the socialization process is the way I think of it. Is our job is to go socialize an idea and then go socialize through demos and get people talking about it, giving us feedback. And the program of record thing it's an interesting conversation, because if we look at SBIRs and program of record, they all have their place, but I kind of put them over in this bucket of this is how things used to work. And the program of record really makes sense if you're building exquisite systems and you're a prime, because you're going to go for Army and you're going to build this radar system, vehicle, missile system. You're going to build this thing. You're going to build a radio. It's going to be in production in use for 30 years. Program of record makes a ton of sense. But from my perspective as an innovation-focused company or person, it's about socializing, because I know every time I talk to somebody about client's thing, my thing, they're like, I love everything about it except for I want to change everything. And then they give me all this feedback and say, yeah, we would, we'll buy 10 of these, or we'll demo this, or we would love this if it had X, Y, and Z. And I think, man, if I followed the normal path of waiting and trying to just get a program of record, I would have the exact wrong thing that 99% of the people that I talk to want. I might have one big contract, but if I'm trying to create innovation at this rapid pace and get it to market, that's exactly not it. It's an interesting perspective. I'll put it in a different way, I guess, is that these programs and this startup methodology into defense is popular enough now that it's attracted haters who are like, hey, the government shouldn't fund innovation. They should just be a customer. I'm like, I see the perspective here, but I also think that the Chinese government spends $100 billion on defense innovation a year, and we're spending $2 billion. And so this is an asymmetric use of capital. We should be funding innovation. The gains on it are pretty absurd.
We have a tendency here in the US, at least, I don't know if it's everywhere, but certainly here, where it's just super easy to bag on the government. But look, here's my cell phone. I've got RF, microelectronics, capacitive touch, miniaturized computing, the CMOS camera, the internet. Every aspect of our lives, logically speaking, traces its roots back to government R&D. It's that simple. You might even zoom out and say the reason VC exists and has been so successful is actually exactly because of the investments that government made in critical technologies, often to solve defense needs that people were able to then find alternative uses for. Look at the last 30 years of history in venture capital and tell me what would have happened if the internet hadn't been invested in by DARPA.
And that's Steve Blank's argument about Fairchild Semiconductor and the start of Silicon Valley is literally because of government intervention, funding, and the triple helix of innovation with colleges, industry, and government all working together towards a common goal. And then they're able to create such a synergistic area that to this day, the vast majority of software innovation, and now what's happening in LA is a whole separate conversation around hard tech and manufacturing. But like regionally, it's just bizarre what has happened now 70 years later, still going.
Still going. The other aspect of that too, for folks living in the Bay Area, again, none of this would have happened. There's a very direct line between government funding, Berkeley and Stanford, in particular, and everything that's happened in the Bay Area since. I just don't think it's realistic. And I just think the appetite for venture capital to invest in more formative technologies, this category we somehow call deep tech, it's really just anything that isn't immediately marketable. I don't blame venture capital. It's already risky enough. There is a role for the government to invest in these sorts of formative technologies that have the opportunity to transform our lives over time horizons that are uninvestable by even large institutions, or that involve a degree of complexity that large institutions aren't able to manage. To me, I just don't see any other argument. I see the other side of most arguments. That's not one that I do.
Yeah, I think we're in alignment on that. It's fun to play devil's advocate, and you can get some attention on the internet by, riling people up. But the reality of it is we've already played out the experiment. We're seeing a new experiment happen, and we're seeing it play out. So it's kind of hard to make a contrarian argument when the contrarian argument that was previous is already playing out. We can see like it's working. Help me future pace on this, because I'd really like to get your perspective, since you have been in this vein for quite some time, like boots on the ground, working with founders, is like, let's push this out. Maybe not on our current trajectory, because I really feel like in the past 2 years, arguably maybe 3 years, like the whole game has changed. Future pace with me, like what do you see in the next 3 to 5 years? Like how will this situation evolve?
I would say this pace of change is going to accelerate, if anything. I look back to 2016, 2017, where I was talking to my boss at the time. I happened to be assigned to this wargaming outfit, and I'm talking to my boss, and I'm like, look, I think that if we can get our thinking right, this whole defense innovation thing that at the time AFWERX had put out that was centered around wargaming. I think this defense innovation thing is really about acquisition reform. And he sits back in his chair and he's like, that's interesting. And it was a thought that he hadn't considered. Very smart guy who had done a lot of thinking about this particular memo that AFWERX had put out. Yeah. And you fast forward to today, this now 7 years later, right? But by 2018, AFWERX was on the radar, and it was specifically about, hey, wargaming isn't enough. Thinking about it isn't enough. Shaping requirements isn't enough. We have to actually get out there. We have to actually get money into people's hands, get them prototyping so that we can learn. All of that has happened at this point. I was involved in a program called Pilot Training Next starting in 2018. Long story short, we took a student paper and turned it into a concept demonstrator, turned it into a prototype, turned it into a program, secured $150 million for it in the space after about maybe 2-3 years of experimentation. And it's ultimately now fielded across the Air Force, picking up steam in the Navy, getting played with in the Army a little bit. But in the process, it's transformed the global flight training and simulation industry. That's more of what we need. We need more of these, I would call it a moonshot project. Our boss at the time said, your goal is to train up a high school graduate to fly the F-35 in 6 months or less. Right now, it's a 2.5 year process so that they're like minimally capable. Flash forward, well, what are we trying to do in Ukraine right now? We're handing F-16s to people who have never flown an American aircraft before. And how are they trying to prepare themselves for that lesson? They're using these VR devices that we built. We need more of that. That is what I think we'll see. I think we need to think across what's called in military parlance, and excuse me, everybody, for being ridiculously nerdy here, but .MLPF, right? And it's doctrine, operations, training. This is embarrassing. Maintenance, logistics, and programming and personnel and all that sort of stuff, right? Anyway, the full program. We need to think about innovation as not an acquisition activity. It's an operational transformation activity. And government has to get its head wrapped around that to say, look, if what I'm trying to do is squeeze the next 2% of efficiency out of this program using the same idea I did yesterday, I have a process for that, and it works really well. And that's the traditional acquisition system. There needs to be a pathway where we can harness emerging technologies that fundamentally change the decision space in terms of operations, where we can start pulling the levers of doctrine, pulling the levers of operations, pulling the levers of training. How do I train somebody on this new technology so that they can conduct this operation to achieve this vision we have? Nobody's answering that question right now. Nobody's even asking that question right now. I think that's what we're going to be seeing by the end of this decade. And I think what I would love to see is places like Defense Innovation Unit, where I used to work, phenomenal organization, hands down smartest people in DoD, particularly from a technology standpoint, but also from an operations standpoint. Places like that being empowered to go out to the market, to bring in critical technologies, but more importantly, to place it in the hands of a warfighter to evaluate it. And I'll say play with it, but it's not a game. Seriously, think about it, but not in an experimental framework. You have to use it. We have to be open to whatever it tells us. We have to be ready to scrap it at a moment's notice. And we also have to be ready to scale it. I think we're going to see that, because as I look across DoD right now, I see pieces of that happening everywhere. I see all the big pieces of it happening somewhere. Nobody's put it together yet. I would submit, as we went through, ultimately at DIU was for that Pilot Training X program is an exemplar of what ought to be happening. And if we can get there with even just a few programs every year, I think we will have fundamentally solved this problem of accessing the innovation base in the United States and harnessing it for national security purposes. I hope that's what we see in the next 5 years. I won't say that that's what we're going to see, but I think that's where we're heading.
That's fantastic. I think there's a lot of challenges around the messy middle of getting very smart people to solve very big challenges. And as we get the reps in of moving across however you want to see that as an innovation pipeline, commercialization, or acquisition pipeline, you're going to see more. I believe there's going to be a lot more startups that are on the, hey, we're building around training. Hey, we're building around sustainment. Hey, we're building around support services, integration, kitting, depot activities. There's a huge space on that long tail of sustainment that needs innovation as well, but not because it doesn't work or because it's very expensive, which in some cases you can argue whatever you'd like, but because as innovation moves across to solve those challenges, we'll have to more rapidly, like in your case, train people, or we'll have to more rapidly understand how to configure something, deploy something, move something, maintain something, So as we start moving at venture speed versus traditional military speed, all of the support structures around that will have to change as well, which I think is really cool. You're seeing this play out already in manufacturing. The actual brass tacks commercialization is like a lot of the innovations happening, but then how do you scale innovation? How are you actually going to produce this thing? And I'm kind of or tangentially in that business myself, so I understand like that is a really, really, really hard challenge. And so everybody that's working on MRP software, ERP software, supply chains, supply chain intelligence, machining, manufacturing, even hiring, training, security that's around supply chain and security that's around industrial IoT, all of these things also will tangentially change. And it's interesting to see that bubble up as well. It's not just about, we love Shield AI. I love the VBAT. I think it's really, really cool. It's got cool software on it. It looks awesome, right? It flies great. Okay, make 10,000 of them, right? Make them cost a tenth as much. How do you do that? And right now, that's not really what they're doing and is probably not feasible with the DIB that we have. There's a strong potential that we do need to do that. There's a less than zero probability that maybe not them, but something like that, somebody will say, I want 10,000 of those next year. I think innovation is great because it's a forcing function across an entire value stream.
I would say for those sorts of trends to be capitalized on, the programs you're referring to are doing some amazing things, in the autonomy space. But for them to be capitalized on, there's this saying, quantity has a quality all its own. That's Mantech, manufacturing technology. I was just out with a client in Georgia a couple weeks ago doing a manufacturing technology demonstration that the Air Force had arranged. I guess I can't say the company, but it was a really great thing that this person said. He's like, look, I interview people coming in, looking for a job, and we put down an object in front of them and say, give them a tape measure and say, measure this for me. And they come back and say, it's 10 inches and 12 millimeters. And he says, you want to try that again? 13 millimeters? His point is, one of the most critical challenges in national security we're facing is our inability to use a tape measure. We have so prioritized these software systems, data systems, and there's a tremendous amount that they are doing, can do, will do, not taking anything away from it. But at some point, it becomes about manufacturing resilience. It becomes about our ability to outproduce. All of these old things are going to become new again. And I think we're starting to see that pivot. I think the fragility of the industrial base and our dependence on things like energy really came to the fore with the invasion of Ukraine, and how quickly our defense industrial base, not the defense innovation base, ran out of capacity, and not just ours, but our allies as well. And I think this ongoing realization of how vulnerable we are in areas like microelectronics or energy disruptions, we are seeing this decoupling. We're going to be trading with China forever. That's not going to stop, nor should it. And again, we don't want it to. But we will be more secure if capabilities like these autonomous swarming drones are able to be produced in much greater numbers. And I don't think there's anybody right now would argue that China has let's say like a clear lead in autonomy, right? I don't think that exists right now. I would actually argue we're probably in the lead. But I would not even attempt to argue that a system with 10% of the capability from an autonomy perspective, but produced 100 times as often, would not overwhelm anything we put together.
It's an easy argument to make, right?
And so we have to be investing in these hard tech solutions. And I think clearly that's where the puck is going from the government perspective. I think that's where our stronger economy is going to be just in general. I think somebody has to be looking at these manufacturing technologies. How do we make these transformations in productivity that happened in the office start happening in manufacturing to make ourselves competitive again, but also to make ourselves resilient?
It's amazing. Eric, before we go, do you have some words of wisdom for a startup that might be listening?
I would say if you are trying to be involved in this space, I think you need to have an honest discussion with your board, with your co-founders, with your team, and clearly evaluate the opportunity with the government. What is it going to take to get there? What are the timelines we're expecting? And who on our team is in charge of that? What expertise are we bringing to the table in that realm? And then have a willingness to go out and say, okay, we have that talent. We understand that timeline, or we don't. And I think that's the next level of maturity, is to understand that to do this well, you need multiple careers worth of people and talent that are focusing on all the different aspects of this. I think you need a strategist who understands how to navigate the system and how the government is wired. I think you need a contracting specialist or person who understands the nuance of government contracting regulations, because you're not going to make that go away. By the way, there's like tremendous value in understanding it so that you can go toe to toe with a skilled government negotiator and make sure that you're getting the value that you deserve. I would say you need a proposal writer. It is not the case that a great technologist is automatically a great writer. And, one of the things that we did on our team was recognize that proposal writing is an art form. And it is not enough to just hire somebody who puts technical writer on their resume. Nobody sets out to become a technical writer. They happen into it. What we really focused on was just going out and getting great writers and then teaching them to be a technical writer. I think our writing is a lot better and it's a lot more readable. As somebody who's read like a couple thousand of these applications, you got to be a great writer. So I'll leave that there. And then, the last would be, graphics. How do you display data? How do you communicate data in a simple way? It's not to say you have to have all these people on a full-time team. In fact, our business model is exactly the opposite, is seeing how much we can do on a fractional basis. There is a role for full-time at a more advanced stage, right? Phase 2, phase 3. It's time to get an account manager. But all the things that get you into there and then navigate you through there, it takes a village to get this done. And if you don't have it on your team, you're not going to win. That would be my message to folks, is to take this seriously, respect the process. And if you're going in thinking you're running straight towards a brick wall, that's where you should just take your $2 million phase 2 award and pack it up and go off to something else. Again, perfectly viable strategy from a business perspective. I won't take a judgment on it. If that's your willingness, that's the strategy that you're on, whether you want to be on that strategy or not.
I'd prefer that they didn't, because I
would prefer that they didn't too.
I want to make something. All right. I want to invent something. I want to make something. I want to sell something.
I think the exception to the rule is the person that's going to go out and do that. And most often those folks don't end up getting the phase 2 anyway, right? Most people, though, want it to be a lot easier and hope that it's a lot easier. And I think the fact is that if it were easy, it would have been done before.
Eric, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you're traveling around, you're a busy man. So I really appreciate you hopping on the show and sharing your thoughts about startups, funding, and Gallium. This is great.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I'm excited to see what the future is. I'm thankful that folks like you are a part of it, and we've got so much energy behind this movement. So it's working, and I hope folks can take heart in that.
My name is Callye Keen, and this has been the Startup Defense.